Resuming about democracy, in general, I argue that in democracy we need two things: credibility and competition. The book calls what I call competition contestation. But it's these two things that lead to participation. People have to think that their political institutions are legitimate, so they have to have credibility. They need to believe in these institutions. And then the other thing that we need is competition. If there's only one people running for power, then it's not democracy. We need to have challengers. We need to have people running for office. There needs to be competition for office. And this is what I write my dissertation about, by the way. My PhD dissertation is on this. And it's on explaining how between elections, participation changes by a lot, when a lot more people vote or a lot less people vote. And I argue that it's because competition and credibility change between those two. You can ask me about it during my office hours. I won't speak for a long time about my dissertation in one of these videos. But see, look at how rights matter in this context. The suffrage and the disenfranchisement matter. What's the suffrage? The suffrage is the right to vote. And so over time, we see that in the history of democracy, more and more people could vote. There was a point where only rich people could vote. Then all the white men could vote. And then after that, in some countries, they included non-white people. And then in some other countries, they included women first. And now everybody can vote. Disenfranchisement is just as important as suffrage because it means that some people who in theory have the right to vote have had that right taken away from them. Think about how right now in the US there's this whole debate about the disenfranchisement of former felons. If you've been to jail, it's really hard to gain back your voter rights. And in some states where the justice system is made in a way that it's very easy to go to jail, a lot of people have had their right to vote taken away from them. And you can have a debate about whether you think it's safe to let ex-convicts, ex-felons vote. But it's a form of disenfranchisement. It's also very important that we have a strong rule of law, and so we have to write our constitution in a way that a president cannot take away liberal rights from us. I'll skip over what a constitutional monarchy is because it's pretty easy, and I'll focus instead on illiberal democracy, non-liberal democracy. What's the argument here? Well, what these dictators or like strong presidents like Vladimir Putin say, we have to deliver to our people. Nobody's got time for democracy and for human rights here, or for political rights. And the problem is always here. If you're part of the dominant group, if you're Russian, if you've got money in Russia, all is well for you. You're going to be able to do business, you're going to be able to send your kids to school, everything is fine. If you're a minority, or if you disagree with Putin's politics, well, good luck. You might as well leave the country and go somewhere else. You have the examples from the book of both Russia and Singapore. I won't talk about this a lot because you already have a series of examples for the assignment from this week, but try to think about how different governments behave, and since in your assignment you have to talk about borders, think about how different governments deal with their borders. Keep in mind in general, if you read the example about Singapore, that it's much easier to govern a country when a country is small, and especially if you are in a place where there's a lot of trade and commerce, such as Singapore in Southeast Asia. In general, the part about authoritarianism is also very interesting after illiberal democracy. In general, we try to think about authoritarian regimes, about non-democracies, as basically being all the same. Well, there are many variants of it that we have to try to understand. The craziest one is totalitarianism, which comes from the word total. So it's where the government tries to control everything. So it's like communist Soviet Union or like Nazi Germany. Those are forms of totalitarianism. Then the book also talks about monarchy and theocracy as if they were common. Monarchy, there's very few monarchies left in the world. And also theocracy, Iran in in the Middle East is probably the only theocracy in the world, but at the same time, even there, there's a strong civilian government alongside the religious government, the theocratic government. So I would say that neither monarchy nor theocracy matters much today. What matters a lot is one party state. They were very, very common before and after World War II, and it's where a single party, like the fascist party, the Nazi party, the Communist Party, takes control of a certain country. Or also, if some of you are familiar with the politics of Mexico, Mexico was also a one-party regime, a one-party state. And why use the party? Well, using a political party makes it much easier to control a country because you can use the political organization of the party to organize the people, to organize them in recreational circles, to organize them to do rallies, to organize them to support the government. And then the last type of authoritarian regime is a dictatorship, which is when a person rises above all. Of course, a one-party state and a dictatorship can overlap with each other because you can have a one-party state with a strong dictator. In general, it's easier to govern with a party than without, because when you just have a dictator or like you just have an authoritarian king, it's hard to justify. It normally needs a lot of military power and police power. Also, very important in this kind of context is the role of the secret police or of the network of informants, of like the people who rat out on you if you speak against the government. The most famous example of a country of total paranoia and secret police is the example of communist East Germany between 1945 and 1989, where everybody was just spying on each other. There were a lot of spies and of informants for the government. And one of the best movies I've actually ever seen in my life is a German movie by Florian von Donnersmarck of the early 2000s. It's called The Lives of Others. I think it's probably on Netflix, and you should probably watch it. It's a great, great movie about an informant, a state informant. Okay, in the section about defending limited power in practice, you can read about how China has changed over time, opening up to a market economy and hinging on nationalism. The articles that I have assigned for you this week should be particularly telling in showing how the Chinese state sees itself, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments about this. So, what are these two articles about China for? Well, first of all, keep in mind that they are articles from China Daily, which is the English language newspaper published by the press agency of the government since 1980. So you can consider it official government propaganda. It's not free journalism. And so you really hear the point of view of the Chinese government on stuff if you read China Daily. Of course, it would be interesting to follow it every day for a while and see what it says about global politics or about China. But since we don't have infinite time, I just picked two articles. And one shows you how the Chinese government talks about its internal politics, and the other one talks about how China reflects on its image in the rest of the world. Read them and keep in mind what you read in the book about authoritarianism. It's not like what is said in these articles is right, but it's a perspective. It's a certain point of view on China.